I'm also against uprooting anybody, Palestinian or Israeli, from the West Bank. If you're going to make peace, then the people should be able to live in peace. If you're telling me the only way to make peace is to uproot every single Jew from Judea and Samaria, well, first of all, Judea and Samaria is the heartland of Jewish history. Jews have been there for thousands of years. There's no reason historically to remove them. But more important from a practical perspective, what kind of peace is that? You know, when I was in Israel a few weeks ago, we were going to visit a Palestinian, or actually an Israeli Arab friend of mine, but he was in the Palestinian territories. And you get to these areas where you have these big red signs, no Israeli allowed beyond this point. Now, as an American, I'm not Israeli, I could have gone. But the subtext of that is no Jew allowed beyond this point. And it's true, it's an Israeli sign. It's not a Palestinian sign, but it's there to protect people. The danger of a Jewish person walking around some Palestinian areas in areas A and B, and certainly in Gaza where I wouldn't feel comfortable, those are real. And if you can't create a society where those threats don't exist, then you're not really creating peace, are you?
This refugee question is very interesting. And, you know, for example, a lot of people aren't aware that there's a dedicated agency to Palestinian refugees, and the rules around what makes one a refugee are different from the standard UN refugee scenario. And so maybe you can kind of speak to that briefly.
Yeah, it's an important topic as well. Most argue that that is the only class of refugees that is treated this way, where it's an inherited refugee status. So let's say my parents, for example, who fled Hungary, one at the start of the Holocaust or close to the start of the Holocaust, one in 1956, were refugees, but I'm not a refugee and I can't claim I'm a refugee. Palestinians, though, are allowed to claim refugee status generation after generation after generation. The world spends an enormous amount of money helping these refugees, or these so-called refugees. Many of them actually live in these decrepit camps because they're used as political pawns. These are people who, there's no reason why they need to live this many years after the conflict in these camps. The goal of a refugee agency, whether it's at the UN or elsewhere, should be to repurpose their lives, to be able to give them a new future, not to keep them in these terrible camps where they don't have a future. And there are many Palestinians who have escaped those camps and have built beautiful lives in different countries, here in the United States and Canada and the United Kingdom and plenty of other places. But so many of them are stuck there, and that's a real shame. So this agency is funded by lots of money. It runs practically bankrupt every year. They spend more than they have. A lot of the money is misused. It's a corrupt organization, and they're always begging for money. And we tried, President Trump tried, to retool the agency. He cut funding. He did it in two parts. He cut half the amount of money, and the U.S. is the biggest funder to the Palestinians, generally speaking. He cut half and basically said, you have a year to figure out how to repurpose this agency to give these people a better future. He wasn't saying, give up whatever claims you think you might have. That's a different issue. That gets either resolved or doesn't get resolved as part of a peace negotiation. But he was saying, stop funding these camps and this anti-Semitic, anti-Israel education that's taught in these camps, and figure out a better way to treat these people in a way that they can have better lives. But the world wasn't ready for it. Think of how many employees of this agency would lose their jobs if we actually did away with the agency and made the lives of the Palestinian people better. So the next year he cut the funding entirely, again to the outrage of the world. It's much easier for the world to write checks into this problem and throw money at it instead of trying to fix the problem and give the Palestinians better lives. But that's not Trump's mindset. That's not the mindset of a business person. He's not a politician. His goal is to make things better, not just pay into a system using taxpayer money for a broken cause.